Good morning. I'm Ed Elder, president of the Kansas City Colliers office. On behalf of myself, my partners, and the entire Kansas City office, thank you for joining us today. Our hope and our goal was to host our event live, but given the current environment that we're in, we've had to make some adjustments like so many other organizations have had to do. We've successfully navigated through the pandemic over the past 2 years and feel good about where things are heading, particularly this year, 2022. After a short video featuring some of our select properties where we transacted business in 2021, my interview with Peter will begin. Peter's comments are more from a national perspective. I'm hopeful and confident that you will appreciate his perspective, his insight. Within the next 2 weeks, you will receive an email from our office that will provide a link. The link will be able to download our 2022 forecast book. There will also be highlights from last year, but more importantly, our view of our industry going forward. Again, thank you and Happy New Year. Welcome, Peter. On behalf of myself and Colliers, Kansas City, very excited to have you with us today as our virtual keynote speaker for our annual commercial real estate forecast.
It's a pleasure.
Peter,
It's a pleasure to be here.
This is our 19th year, and
It's my 70th.
well, normally when I do this, I've got a crowd of several hundred people on a cold January day. And but we're adapting to the times as we know it, so we're going to do this virtually. And even though I'm very familiar with Peter, I'm a subscriber to your newsletter. I watch your podcast on a regular basis. You're not a household name here in Kansas City, so I think for the benefit of our clients, our customers, our guests that are on this call today, I thought I'd just provide a little background on you. And no surprise to you, you have a unique resume, sort of what I would characterize, you kind of bridge the academia world with the real world. That's right. You've had a lot of success in the academic world. You've served on a number of corporate boards, former chairman of the Rockefeller Center, part of several boards on REITs, advised counsel, several family offices. You're a boutique investor. And as I mentioned earlier, you're the author of what I would characterize as kind of the wildly successful Linneman letter that is very popular. But most importantly, which I think you're probably most proud of, is read a little bit about your charity, which you've now run for 18 years in the Philadelphia area, helping out youth, in particular destitute youth. So I know you're very proud of that.
Yeah, you kind of got it. I'm not good enough to be I guess, just an academic. I'm not good enough to be anything. I'm kind of this odd combination, but it's been a fun career.
So that's great, Peter. Let me set the stage here a little bit as we kick off our conversation. Given your knowledge, your expertise, our conversation today is going to be centered and more focused on a national perspective as we kind of look back the last 11, 12 months, and as we also look into 2022. Mid-year, I remember listening to you saying, look, this feels like the roaring 20s. You were kind of predicting that the balance of this year and even into next year, 22, which is where we are now, that the glass is half full. I think specifically you said, look, number one, buy assets, finance them as cheaply as possible as long as you can. Don't worry about inflation. Cap rates are going to continue to compress. And if you can, from an investment perspective, keep buying multifamily and industrial. I guess my question is, do you generally still feel that way? Are there any updates to that, any tweaks, or is that kind of where you still stand today?
It's pretty much where I still stand. Obviously, we have this, what I view as temporary could be a couple of years, but this supply reduction induced inflation. This is not the typical inflation. This is the economy's recovered, but supply has not recovered. And if we'd have had this conversation in 2019, Ed and I said, what would happen if suddenly supply fell by 2% in lots of sectors? You'd say prices go up. Well, what happened is we took an odd journey, but the economy is about the same size as it was at the end of 2019 from a demand point of view, and capacity is like 2% smaller. No surprise, we've got price increases. And that was partly because some businesses went out of business, some reduced their capacity, and in many cases, government has limited movement and capacity. Those are not permanent. And so I would highlight that as a bit of a difference from when we talked, but there's a lot of money, more to come into buying assets, including real estate. And that will put a lot of downward pressure on cap rates over the next several years. And the economy, I think, has a lot of pent up still, a lot of pent up. For example, yes, GDP is back to where we were in 2019, but we would have grown for 2 years. So we have like 2 years of pent up growth yet to come, and more than that in the labor side, because labor markets always lag. So we have basically, think of the next 2 years this way. This is a little overly simple, Ed, but think of the next 2 years as you're going to get all the normal growth you would get in a normal 2-year period of time, okay? And on top of that, you're going to make up the bulk of this pent up 2-year growth that didn't occur, right? Because we're still today where we were as we start 2022, we're basically where we ended, where we began, 2020, right? That's the missing 2 years. So imagine that missing 2 years of growth, and the 2 years of missing growth, about 5% of GDP, and about 3 to 3.5 million jobs. So we've got that pent up of about 5% of GDP and 3 to 3.5 million jobs, plus the normal growth of GDP we'd get over the next 2 years, right? That's why I see it as a roaring 20s. And then when you add on to that, lots of money, lots of money, lots of money. And it's not bubble money, right? That money is permanent, right? It's not like it's a bubble phenomena. This is money, money, money. What's the old song? Money makes the world go round, or,
right.
Well, it's certainly making asset prices go up.
Peter, I'm going to pivot here for a second. One of my favorite books of all time, business books, is Good to Great, Tom Collins, and obviously you're familiar with that book. And I guess this question is more centered around just sort of the environment that we're in, having to adapt. You may recall in the book that he interviewed General Adam Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 5, 6, 7 years. And when he got out, the prison camp, Collins talked to him as he was writing the book, but when he got out of prison camp, what allowed him to survive was he didn't think about getting out at Easter or getting out at Christmas. He just lived day to day. I know that may be kind of an odd way as I'm leading into my question, but it seems like if you rewind our timeline here back to a year from now, or even 9 months ago, we were all kind of hoping that the variant at that time, the Delta would subside. We would get past that and it would be clear sailing or happy days are here again. But now we've got the latest Omicron. And I guess what I'm trying to say in a long-winded fashion is, are we just going to have to learn how to grind through this, and that we are slowly learning as a country, both locally, regionally, and nationally, just going to live with this and just move forward? Is that kind of your sense as well?
That's my gut. By the way, I never quite contextualized it the way you said, but I think that's a terrific way to contextualize it. Look, we've ground, I think your verbiage is perfect. We've ground on my whole life with great executives dying, great executives retiring, great entrepreneurs losing their touch, terrible weather, terrible storms, serially bad politicians and economic policy my whole life. And you kind of go through all the strikes, you can go through all the things, and we grind on through it. That is kind of what we do. That's our species. And we probably do it best the way you described, which is, yep, have a vision, but you got to make it through each day. You got to make it through each day. Got to make it through each day. And you know what makes me proudest? To be an American at this moment we're sitting here in early 2022 is, my God, just think of all we just went through from a epidemiological point of view, from a shutdown of an economy which has never occurred before, the political turmoil, think of all that stuff of the last 2 years. And you know what? In spite of all that, our GDP is 1.5% above where we were 2 years ago. That's an amazing, amazing achievement. Our employment is only probably 3 to 4 million fewer than we were that 2 years ago. What an amazing testimony to getting through it. Think of all the people who died during that time period, the loved ones, the co-workers, that died early. I mean, not just from COVID, by the way, from all kinds of things. What an amazing testimony to the vibrancy of the private sector, if you will, that we're ahead even after all that. Even after all that. And as a bit of that subsides, we'll do even better. And that's what I see. And I think the way you framed it is perfect, which is, yes, you got to look where you're going. You got to know it's out there to stay alive, but just get through each day productively and we'll do all right.
A minute ago, you talked about multifamily and industrial kind of being the darling of the various asset classes that make up the commercial real estate sector. One that's been written about and talked about over the last 18, 20 months is the impact that the pandemic is having on value of office buildings around the country. And I guess my question is, as we continue to work through this pandemic and as users of space slowly, the larger users in particular, slowly begin to come back to the office. And as you know, office leases are yet to burn off or expire over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, particularly the larger users of space. But what, in your opinion, is long-term the impact on value? I mean, the simple answer is, if people are carving back and using less space, whether it's 10%, 20%, or whatever the percentage is, that has to have, a serious impact on the value of a lot of these assets around the country. Or are we talking about it too much? And at the end of the day, if we fast forward time 2, 3 years from now, because I'm a believer that people need to be together, to collaborate, and there's a lot of value in that, versus this, not policy, but this feeling that we need to be at home all the time. What are your thoughts on the hybrid work from and the impact on value for office buildings?
So first of all, look, we were much more flexible at work before the pandemic than the stereotype. On any random day in almost every office, somebody was traveling, somebody was on vacation, somebody was working from home, somebody was out sick. I mean, it wasn't like it was a scene from Ben-Hur where everybody was down in the galley rowing their chained to their oars. You know, it wasn't that. We had come a long way. There was already a lot of flexibility in the workforce. I think there might be a bit more, but here's the thing about the flexibility of the workforce. I used to fly a lot. I fly less a lot the last year, but I think it's coming back. And one of my favorite things to do on the flight is watch what the people around me do. And so imagine I'm on a flight back from Europe, coming back from Germany to the United States. Well, that's a daytime flight. So it's a daytime Tuesday flight. You're in business class. The people there are workers, and it's business hours. And Ed, what are most of the people doing in business class on a 9-hour flight on a Tuesday in what amounts to 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon or 7 in the morning? They're sleeping, they're playing video poker, not you know what I mean, the card games and such on their device. They're watching movies. Why aren't they working? It's a work day, it's work hours. And I'm a worker on the plane, right? It's a good time to get stuff done. Most people don't have the self-discipline. Most people don't have the self-motivation. And most people don't view it as a productive work environment, right? Well, what makes you think it's different at home for most people? Most people are not self-disciplined. Most people are not highly motivated and self-motivated. And most people don't have great work environments at home. So is it surprising that a lot of people are not as productive at home? Not to mention what you're saying about interacting and stimulus and catalyst and socialization and building a culture with new employees, right? So I think we do come back. I think we weren't nearly as regimented as the articles would make it sound. And the adjustment is not as radical as people make it sound. Now, maybe I'm wrong. My wife of almost 49 years regularly points out to me that I'm wrong. I know I find that hard to believe, but it's possible I'm wrong. But I think we come back for the basic reason that to the extent we were flexible, we were already flexible. Fine, maybe we're a little more flexible. We were already heading that way. But most people are more productive at work than not. When I say work, at office, I think it's just factual.
Yeah. Even though this is a forecast, Peter, looking forward, but just listening to you, I'm just curious, when you think back the last 12 months, what surprised you about 2021? Were there one or two things that maybe happened in 21 that I don't want to say caught you off guard, but you were surprised about relative to the economy or just anything in general?
I'd say two things. One is I knew there would be these what are being called supply chain issues, but that's a broad rubric for capacity limitations or supply limitations, but I'm not quibbling over how to call it. So let's say I knew that those would exist. You can't shut down an economy and then expect everything to come back. Businesses went out of business and, people were discouraged from, think of the guys who were stuck on those ships for 6 months, the merchant marine types. You think they were anxious to sign up for another when the last time they got on the boat, nobody would let them off when they got to port? So that had to be a damper. So what surprised me was not that there were those issues, but how long they've lasted. So if you'd have asked me a year ago, I said, yeah, there'll be these issues. There'll be some price run-ups. I wouldn't have called it inflation. I'd have called it some price run-ups, not to be cute, but it'll be kind of over in 6 months, 8 months. Well, it has surprised me it's taken longer. So that's a live and learn. The other thing that surprised me was that we did not during 2021 come up with a distributable, highly effective COVID therapeutic. We came up with vaccines, but not a therapeutic. Now, at the end of 2021, Merck and Pfizer announced that they have highly effective therapeutics to treat someone in the early stages. I quite honestly, if you'd asked me a year ago, would have thought we'd have had, I didn't know who it would be from, but we would have had by mid 2021, certainly by the third quarter. And as a result, I just expected that to be a bigger positive effect in 2021. I think it'll be I think that's the biggest news of the fourth quarter. People talk about tapering and interest rates and inflation. To me, the biggest economic news of the fourth quarter of 2021 was the Pfizer and Merck announcements of highly effective therapeutics, because that creates a very different landscape for us this year, next year, and thereafter. Back to your living with it point.
Right. So Peter, I'm going to give you a word, and I'm always one of these guys that's into time management. And I'm going to give you a word. I'm going to ask for you to take right at a minute to respond. And I got a stopwatch here, so I'm going to hold you to that. So I've got 5, 6 words. And I'm going to run through these words, some of which we've already touched on, but maybe you could expand just a little bit longer. So I'm going to start off with the first word, which is getting a lot of press every day and is a real issue in the country. But when you answer this first word, I want you to see if you can talk about the psychology around, now I'm going to disclose the word inflation, because it seems like a lot of the folks, and in fact, there was an article in the Wall Street recently about the economists are having a hard time interpreting the Americans' feelings towards inflation as they move forward. So the first word is inflation.
It's an unusually created inflation. It's created by shortages of supply rather than excesses in demand, not to be cute. And those will resolve. There is a risk that in the meantime, people start panicking. So imagine it's raise time at your company, right? Somebody who's listening's company. Are your workers panicked and say, well, I need 6%, thinking this continues forever? Then you sign into 6% and it recedes, and then you're kind of caught behind. So that dimension of expectations, I think, is the big unanswered question about inflation for 2022. How anchored are those expectations?
Job growth.
Very solid, has picked up enormously since September 6th of last year, when we stopped paying people more not to work and stay on unemployment than to come off and work. People will say, I don't want to work anymore. I've reevaluated my life and so forth. But you know what the basic truth is? They still want to buy shoes for their kids. They still want to go on vacation. They still want to buy a nice pair of shoes or a dress or go to the ball game. And to do that, you have to work. And or you're allowed to work, however you want to view it. And I think the return of work will be one of the themes of 2022. It's not a lifestyle issue. It's I got paid not to work issue.
Federal deficit.
Huge, not as huge as it appears, because when you net out the debt that's owed by the government to the government, whether it's owed to the Social Security Administration or it's owed to other government agencies, including the Fed. We only, I use that in quotes, we only owe about $7 trillion to foreigners, all told. All the other debt is owed to ourselves. It's all about us, taking from us to give to us. So we owe $7 trillion to people outside the US. That's a third of GDP. Another way of saying it, if we wanted to, we could take all of our GDP for the first 4 months of 2022 and entirely retire foreign debt. Okay, we would be debt-free of anything foreign. I'm not saying we should do that, but it gives you a sense of how small it is relative to our economy. The debt we owe to ourselves, if it's government owes government, I don't lose any sleep over that. If it's government owes it to you, that's a political battle of who's going to pay who. And so it's not as big a problem as it appears. The real question is, are we getting our money's worth from government spending? That's the real question always.
COVID mutations.
They'll happen. They're no surprise. Probably expect a couple of more tricky ones. The Spanish flu epidemic, for example, took basically 3 years for the mutations to get to a point where they weren't catastrophic. And vaccinations probably speed that along a bit. We have to get used to living with them. Back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm not saying it doesn't take adjustments. But, and I go back to what I said, which is it's pretty remarkable the adjustments we've already made and will continue to make. So don't be surprised at another mutation in 2022 or 2023.
How about the GDP?
Largest, the US in real terms is the largest in the history of mankind. And for any large economy, I'm ruling out like Monaco and small economies, on a per capita basis, highest it's ever been. A tremendously powerful, resourceful, adaptive, creative, innovative economy. Don't bet against it. Politicians cannot destroy it. I'm 70 years old, and bad economic policy has probably existed every year in my life, no matter who's in office, and they can't destroy it. And that's because we're more innovative, we're more creative, we're more this, we're more that, and that overcomes it all. And so the real point is, we are a very robust, dynamic economy. Could we be more robust and more dynamic? Of course. I could have a better diet. You're in great shape, but come on, you ate a slice of cake. You could have a better diet, right? But it is an impressive economic phenomenon. And by the way, don't confuse. We are so much more impressive than China. Our standard of living per capita is like 3.5 times. 3.5 times theirs. And by the way, yes, they grow at a faster percent, but we grow at about the same absolute dollars per year per capita as they do. So, I mean, it's an amazing, imperfect, right? Highly imperfect beast, but it's amazing.
So the next one's a little trickier. As we look into 22, the Fed is going to begin their tapering program, and it appears that rates will increase maybe 2, maybe 3 times in 22. We've been the beneficiary of incredibly low rates for the past couple of years, which has been part of the fuel that's allowed things to move forward as they have. So would you feel comfortable commenting on interest rates?
Yeah, so let's just take at face value what the Fed seems to be signaling. All right. By the way, the Fed is the worst predictor of themselves that exists. So saying that the Fed says something does not mean they're going to do it. The Fed's behavior is more like a teenager's, right? Which I think I might do it, but who knows? Let's suppose they raise interest rates 3 times in 2022. They'll go all the way up to the short rate will go all the way up to 75 basis points. Now, if we were having this conversation in 2019, and I told you in 2022, the short-term rate would be 75 basis points, you would say, wow, that's quite low. How's that going to happen? So even after 3 raises, it's going to be very low. On the long end, when they stop buying in the QE program, QE Infinity program, it will eliminate one of the major buyers of government debt and some other debt. And the long rate will rise a bit. But that happened when they tapered in whatever it was, 2016 or whatever, and the rates rose a bit. And then what they found was there's private buyers out there. There's other sovereign country buyers out there. And if the interest rates rise a bit, instead of sitting on the sidelines, they become buyers. So the people on this, listening to this, most of them probably don't own a lot of bonds right now for the last couple of years. Why? If the interest rate rose on the long end to 2.5%, you'd find it won't go much higher than that because the private buyers will return and replace. So I would think you're going to get maybe 100 basis point sustained increase on the long end as the Fed stops buying. But then the weight of all that money in private buyers' hands, and by the way, other countries, will keep it from going very high.
So Peter, thank you. Great comments. If we're sitting here a year from now, and you have the right to be wrong, where do you think we stand? Any thoughts as you look forward, predictions as you kind of look into your own crystal ball?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to it, which is betting against the US economy with all of its imperfections is generally not a good bet. And further, when savants, the newspapers, the media are saying, oh, we're going to go to hell in a handbasket, which is a bit of the narrative of the day, right? Because of the inflationary and the supply chain issues. Basically, when they tell you we're going to hell in a handbasket, get ready for good times has been the history. And therefore, I think that this is going to be a great year, and we're going to be sitting here in 2023, and we're going to say, that was a pretty good year. That was really a pretty good year. By the way, did everything go perfectly? No, but it's a pretty good year.
I think, Peter, we've done a fairly good job of covering the waterfront today. You're surrounded and talk to, interact with a lot of smart people in a lot of different areas, a lot of different industries around the country. I guess I'm just curious, have I missed anything? Is there something that you're picking up on?
Well, the only one I would do, we've touched on it, but the only one is this internal debate. You know, the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other kind of shoulder. And the internal debate of, I got a lot of cash. I've got record amounts of cash, whether I'm a company or an individual. I'm willing to bet almost all of the listeners have record amounts of cash personally and corporate levels. That's what the data shows. And on the one, it's not a devil and an angel, right? But on the one side, it's saying, hold on to it. Hold on to it. Something could go wrong. You know, we hit another variant that makes us shut down. We need that cash to tide us over. And on the other shoulder is saying, come on, we've weathered the worst of this. You can't sit on this much cash forever. when you're going to jump in, what are you waiting for? Just jump in. It's like remember when I used to do jump rope, and the kids would do it and you count, just jump in, get on with it. And so the one thing, if I had to characterize, quote, the smart people I deal with, and they're all smarter than me, it's that debate, which is, do I need to still hang on to my cash to be safe? Or I got to put this money to use? That, and in my view, with myself, I'm having that conversation. And basically what I've decided, and I think a lot have decided, is, okay, I piled up enough cash, and in the near term, any new flows, I'm not piling them up, I'm using them. So I'm not necessarily running down my stock of cash, but I'm not building it up anymore. Yeah. And I think that's the first step to start using that cash. So if I know that's a broad characterization, but that would be my best response to the spirit of what you're asking.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Your insights, your thoughts, your comments, your perspective, I think are right on point. And frankly, I'm confident that our clients that have joined us today feel the same way. So I wish you the best into 22, and we look forward to continuing our relationship with your firm going forward. So thank you, Peter.
My pleasure, and have a wonderful year, everybody.
Thank you.